I got a real treat today for you guys. Sanjay Gupta is a household name. He is, of course, the multi-Emmy award-winning chief medical correspondent for CNN, host of the CNN podcast Chasing Life. His new book, It Doesn't Have to Hurt, I think is applicable for just about anybody that has ever had any kind of pain. It's a fascinating read. Welcome to the show, sir. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Donnie. I've been a fan of yours for a long time. It's nice to talk to you.
Right back at you. First, just a couple of current event things before we get into the book and sell some books here. A few things I got to get cleared up. I've had a circumcision. I want to make sure that it's not going to lead to any of my kids having autism or anything like that. Let's first get right into that. That's a new thing that came out of RFK Jr. Just let it rip on that one.
Did they have Tylenol?
Yeah, that's the second question. That's the second question.
Well, that was the whole thing, right? He's like, at first there was Tylenol, associated / causal link with autism. It was always unclear exactly what they were saying because you heard both sort of things. And then it was like, well, if you've been circumcised and the kid got Tylenol when they were circumcised, which kids aren't typically getting Tylenol when they were circumcised, that was more evidence of Tylenol being linked to autism. Look, it's crazy and it's embarrassing, really. And I have a lot of friends who are physicians in other countries who, I think for a long time really took their notes from what was happening in the United States with regard to big medical breakthroughs, with regard to public health decisions. I mean, countries call their public health organizations CDC in homage to our organization, here in the United States. So, I think for a long time, not even 5% of the world's population, we are still, but losing that title, the world's leader when it comes to many of these things. And I think, it's worrisome, Donnie, I think what is happening. This thing with circumcision and Tylenol, I mean, it's a little bit of a clown show, but I think it's reflective of, much bigger issues that are going on with these cuts and whether or not, people are looking to the United States as places where they want to do this outstanding medical research for the United States, but for the world.
We hear words like cuts. Talk to my audience a little bit about some of the actual things that are being cut and the devastating results that they can have.
Well, some of them, so I'm a neurosurgeon. So I look at neuroscience, specifically brain tumors, spinal cord research, ALS, all these types of things. And I think it's fair to say that the cuts, I don't think anyone's been immune from this. I don't think anybody has basically said we've been unscathed. I think they've hit more deeply in public health. We saw what happened at the CDC with so many people being laid off, many of them being reinstated, by the way. So, it's just like this instability that is caused across these various sectors. I think the big difference, frankly, when it comes to things like public health versus other areas of society is that it's not just money that is attracting a lot of the talent to these areas. It is stability. It's the idea that you can go to the United States and say, hey, I'm going to work on a project that may take a few years, but if it works, we're going to come up with a fundamentally new way of treating brain tumors or, something big, something, transformative in medicine. So you need both. You need to have the money, you need to have stability. And what I can say as someone who's on faculty at a big university, when I talk to people sometimes who are not just leaving institutions, they are leaving the country, Donnie. We had one brain tumor researcher go to Seoul, South Korea, another one go to Tel Aviv, Israel. That's what I typically hear is we say, hey, look, I think we can float you for a period of time to keep these labs up and running through endowments, through private donations, things like that. And I usually get some version of the same response back, which is, it's about stability. Like, what about the year after that? What about, what is going to happen to all the work that we've spent, more than a decade working on? So I think that's really what's at play here. I mean, there's other things that are more practical right now, like with the government shutdown, there are people who, if they don't get those subsidies for their healthcare, they're not going to be able to buy healthcare. Open enrollment starts November 1st. You got to make a decision. If you don't make a decision, you may not have healthcare at least for the next year until open enrollment again. The reason that open enrollment is such a specific period, I think, is for good reason. You don't want somebody not having healthcare insurance, then they have a problem, then they buy healthcare insurance. That's an unfair gaming of the system. But on the other hand, if you don't buy healthcare insurance because you look at the eye-popping number that's unsubsidized and you say, I just can't afford that this year, even if the government reopens and the subsidies come back, you may not have healthcare insurance for a period of time, which is a problem, you know? And by the way, it's not just poor people. I mean, poor people, as a general rule, in most states will have Medicaid. You're talking about people who are contractors, who are freelancers. You're talking, you know, I got kids in their 20s. You know, it's people like that. They're making enough money, too much to qualify for Medicaid, but not enough to pay for healthcare if they don't get these subsidies.
Yeah. A couple other current event things. A lot of discussion about vaccines, obviously, particularly with RFK, and I want to get your take on the current COVID booster. How you feeling about that? And I would love you to just give me, looking back, how you think we dealt with COVID. Give us a report card. Give us, because hindsight is obviously easy. It's easy to be 2020, but now that we're obviously kind of out of it, and obviously there are still strands and whatnot. So I'd love you take on the current vaccine, and I'd love you take on just overall how you think we did.
Well, first of all, I'm a fan of vaccines.
Thank you.
You know, I think they're given to healthy people to keep them healthy. You know, people say, "Oh, I'm healthy. I don't need it." You're kind of missing the point. It's to keep you healthy. I get my COVID shots. In part, you know, our hospital system asks us to show proof of it. So I think almost all of our healthcare practitioners, unless they've had some sort of opt out, have gotten their boosters. You know, I think the interesting point I think about the boosters or the additional shots is that much like natural immunity, if you get infected, you're going to have immunity for a period of time. What we've learned with COVID, similar to flu, is that immunity does wane. It wanes if you've been infected, and it wanes if you got a vaccine. It doesn't last forever. Things like measles, for example, if you got the infection, you could be immunized for a long time against that. That doesn't happen with COVID. So, you know, you gotta keep getting protected against this. Now, again, if you've had COVID recently, I think there is a fair case to be made that you don't need to have a shot. That because you do have immunity from that natural immunity or infection acquired immunity. And that, I think, probably leads me to, I think, I don't know if I'd call it a mistake, but I think the sort of the presentation around natural immunity was really problematic. Every medical student, you know, day one or early on in their career understands natural immunity. It's how our immune systems work. The fact that people who had natural immunity were still being forced to get vaccines to the peril of their jobs or admissions to universities and things like that, it never made sense, I think. I think initially maybe we thought, hey, look, let's get some data to prove that people who are infected will be immune for a period of time against COVID. And then the data came. The first data came from Israel. A lot of our early data came from Israel. It's a small country. It's a national healthcare system. It's much easier to collect data in places like Israel. But we looked at that data. You know, we reported on that data. And I did ask many times as a reporter of our healthcare authorities, why are we mandating vaccines in people who have naturally acquired immunity? If people don't want the vaccines, you could get your antibodies tested to prove that you have antibodies. And yet I think we probably, you know, as a country took too much of a shotgun approach to that specific issue. But, you know, Donnie, the thing I would say is that I think people expect medical science a lot of times to act like a hard science where, you know, math is 2 + 2 = 4. When you had the vaccines come out initially, they were about 95% effective at preventing infection, as well as keeping people out of the hospital or getting very, very sick. That was based on the initial strains. When Delta and then Omicron came around, those variants, they escaped that sort of protection against infection much more so than the earlier strains. So I think another mistake was made when they said, hey, if you get vaccinated, you cannot transmit the virus. First of all, I'd never like absolutes when it comes to medical and public health science. I don't like it. You know, people who come up to me and I ask them a question, they say 100%. 100%. And I hate that response because it usually means you haven't been thoughtful about this. Hardly anything in life's 100%. Nevertheless, 95% was a good number in that early data. I think they should have said, based on the strain now, with what we know now, this vaccine is 95% effective at keeping you from getting infected. If you do not get infected, you don't have the virus to then transmit to somebody else. Instead, I think what people were told in an effort to really encourage vaccination is, hey, not only will you not get sick, you won't be able to transmit this virus if you get vaccinated.
Yeah.
It was largely true at the time, but the appropriate caveats, I think, should have been put around that as well.
I got you. Let's get into the book. Let's sell some books. It doesn't have to hurt, because this is applicable certainly to at least 51 million book buyers out there. That was an incredible stat when I read that 51 million people in this country, so it's 20% of this country, suffer from chronic pain. Define chronic pain for me first off.
If you want to sort of define it objectively, it is basically pain that occurs every day for at least 3 months. It can occur every other day around that for 6 months. For about 20% of that 50 million people, it is the type of pain that basically prevents you from doing your activities of daily living. These people do not hold down jobs. They don't have fun in their lives. They barely leave the home. That's not all the 51 million people, but it's a significant chunk.
You know, there was a stat that blew me away that just gets our take on pain, in that in China, nobody gets sedated during a colonoscopy. And in Finland, only 6% of people, which means, is our threshold for pain different than people around the world? Because I just had a colonoscopy. The thought of having one without the propofol is no thanks, I'll pass.
I'm with you. I had a colonoscopy recently as well, and I did have propofol, full disclosure. And I think it was Japan, where they basically have
Japan.
And then 6% of the people in Finland, as you mentioned. No, I found that really interesting as well. I didn't know that when I started writing the book, but I was talking to people all over the world. And I think, our perceptions of pain are heavily influenced by our culture. So in the United States, we have a particular disdain for pain. A lot has been spoken about that with regard to opioids. And, at one point we were taking 80% of the world's opioid supply of certain medications. Again, not even being 5% of the world's population. So we took more pills far and away than any other country. We performed more operations. We did 1.2 million spinal operations in 2023. And to give context, in the UK, they did 50,000. So even if and they're about, I think, 1/4 our population,
so
even if you account for population differences, it's still way out of whack.
Yeah.
More procedures, more pharmaceutical medications, and then things like propofol for colonoscopy, which I found interesting. Again, I did the propofol. It would be hard for me to think that I would go through that procedure without it. But a lot of people, doctors around the world, say it is. I don't know how much you want to talk about this on your show, but it's a thin little probe.
let's get into colonoscopies. All right, we'll spend the next half hour on that. I think that'll be a good idea.
You know where the probe goes. And you have people in Japan who are looking at the screen, looking at their colonoscopy as they're getting it done. And, they have high patient satisfaction rates. They don't have sort of the hangover amnesia from propofol, although that works pretty well. So it's just that a lot of our pain is our cultural expectations of it. And I think that this reflected in how we treat it in the United States.
So much in the book is based on mindful-based, therapies, in effect. And for somebody, I'm not going through it now, but I had chronic back pain for a number of years and did everything, trigger points, what do you call when you get the big needle in there? A epidural, and all the different things, and got involved with a physical therapist. If you would have said to me, no, your mind can do this. Doesn't have to be pills. It doesn't have to be procedures. I would say, come on, man, I'm in pain. But yet the book walks right into that. Talk to me about that.
I think there's 2 points about this. There was this comment that a researcher out of the Mayo Clinic made to me early days, and I wrote it down. I remember thinking, I'm going to keep coming back to this. But he made this comment. He said, chronic pain never occurs in isolation. It always comes with baggage attached. When you get to that point where something is now chronic, this is no longer an acute phenomenon. Like you stub your toe, you burn your hand, whatever. That's acute. Why has the pain persisted? The body, it's not serving some sort of evolutionary purpose. You learned your lesson not to stub your toe or burn your hand the first time. Why does this pain persist? Or in your case, torqued your back or whatever sort of brought on that pain in the first place. Why is the pain persisting? It's an enigma. I think it's one of the great unanswered questions in medicine. There are some people who believe there is a reason for chronic pain, even if we haven't figured it out. It's your body trying to tell you something, even if we haven't quite understood what that message is. But I think the idea that once pain becomes chronic, it is essentially it's like post-traumatic stress for the brain.
Yeah.
Post-traumatic stress, you get triggered all the time, and sometimes you don't know why. With chronic pain, it's like a memory loop. It keeps getting replayed over and over again. In addition to treating the pain, you've got to treat that memory loop. Oftentimes it's associated with depression, anxiety, poor sleep. Sometimes the pain made those things worse. Sometimes those things pre-existed and thus made you more of a setup for chronic pain. And I think the point, and I'm not the first person to say this, I think John Sarno, who anybody who's read anything about...
I read the book. I was in pain, and that's whose book you were supposed to read at the time. This was before your book was out, of course.
Oh, yeah, way before. Yeah. And, interestingly, you may know this, Donnie, but, John Sarno passed away. His New York Times obituary had some comment that said basically half the country thought this guy was a pariah.
Yeah.
And half the country thought this guy was a prophet. Yeah. Because he was the one who sort of championed this idea of psychosomatic illness. Like part of this is residing in your mind, this pain. And people, thought the people who did not like him said, well, you're minimizing my pain. You're just saying it's all in my head. And in a way, he was saying that. But I think, frankly, with the best of intentions, I reread the book recently, this idea that unless you treat the baggage associated with the pain, you're not ever going to adequately treat the chronic pain. And we don't do that. Instead, we throw a pill at it. We throw a procedure at it. As a neurosurgeon, I take care of a lot of spine pain, back pain. If a guy comes to my office with 10 years or 5 years of back pain, that should not be treated the same way as a guy who's had
just pulled his
6
back.
weeks.
Yeah.
Why do we treat them exactly the same? They may have some underlying issues that are the same, but they are fundamentally different problems. Even the way where the brain stores pain in the brain is different for acute pain versus chronic pain. I remember thinking when I was writing the book, I wish they had different names even, acute pain versus chronic pain, because they are that distinct in terms of how they actually function in the body.
You've got 5 practical tips in the book. I mean, the first one is, let's get right into them. Focus on sleep.
Most of these things are bi-directional relationships. And what I mean by that is that if I say, hey, focus on sleep, you think, well, how do I got pain. That's why I'm not sleeping. Fair. That's what most patients say. When we started doing some surveys for the book, 70-80% of people would say that. When we started to show data that proved that if you fix the sleep first, you got incredibly reduced pain scores, I think that surprised a lot of people. Again, we think the pain is driving poor sleep, but what we learned is more times than not, poor sleep was what was driving the pain. And it's tough, I think, for people to get their head around because pain often is the culprit for everything, right? We'll blame everything on the pain, but oftentimes that's not the case.
You talk about meditation, breathing. That's a big deal.
I am a big fan of meditation. I'll preface by saying that. I learned how to meditate from a guy named Herbert Benson years ago. I was not a fan of it before that. And frankly, again, as a brain surgeon, there are certain things that, I'm so focused on the functionality of the brain, the idea that meditation could make objective differences in the brain. It was hard for me to buy into that initially. 2 things changed my mind. One is that there was these studies that came out that basically showed people who meditated regularly. And that just meant regularly. It didn't mean for extended periods of time. These weren't like world champion monks or anything. You could find objective changes in their brain, thickening of certain areas of the brain, such as what is called the posterior cingulate cortex, which is just behind an area of the brain that is very much associated with pain. And it was objective, Donnie. The brain would change in response to meditation. That was to the extent that people want and need data to be convinced of things. It was good data that these guys were able to collect. The second thing was there was these protocols that came out of the University of California, San Diego, something called the MORE protocol, Mindfulness-Oriented Recovery Enhancement. And they basically took people in chronic pain and they put them through this very specific meditation program. Some of it could be done virtually. I mean, it wasn't a huge load. It wasn't a huge ask to get people to engage in these protocols. And they did this all around the country. They trained thousands of practitioners. Again, because they could do it virtually, they were getting lots and lots of people to do it. And what they found when they looked at this data after a few years was that meditation sessions could offer, for a period of time, similar pain relief to 5 milligrams of oxycodone.
That's incredible.
So people wanted data. Understandable. Like, this sounds a little too out there. How do I know it's going to work? And to be fair, it's not like it's a cure. Neither are opioids, by the way. They both take away your pain for a period of time. But the idea that you can train your brain to mitigate, if not for a period of time, completely abolish pain, it's revelatory. Maybe it shouldn't be that shocking. I mean, the brain can create pain. Phantom limb pain is pain that is entirely generated by the brain, which is wild. Like, why would a limb hurt that's not even there anymore?
That's crazy.
But the flip side of that is that if the brain can make pain, by understanding those mechanisms, you could potentially train the brain to reduce, if not eliminate, pain as well.
When I had my back issues, I went through a depression, and I went on antidepressants, and that kind of helped me. There's that vicious cycle that happens. I'm curious your take on depression and antidepressants and things as far as, mood alterers, for lack of a better word.
I mean, that's the perfect example. I mean, and I, shame on me a little bit, because as a neurosurgeon, somebody comes with a herniated disc and these types of things. Do we often ask about depression, anxiety, other things that we know are contributing forces to what may be ailing them? If we see a herniated disc, we think, well, look, that's the culprit. We're going to focus on that, remove that disc. Or if there's bones that have slipped, to do a spine fusion, whatever it might be. If you don't also treat the depression or anxiety, it is likely that the person will continue to have chronic pain. And then you think, well, they're a non-responder to the operation. It throws off your data, all this other stuff. Whereas, you getting antidepressants, it probably helped you. Obviously, it would have helped with your depression. But the idea that it is so closely correlated.
It also, because it stopped me from obsessing about my back. It's like it became this vicious cycle that I was in. That every move I would make, I'd go, I hurt my back, and I couldn't stop thinking about the pain. And that it helped me a lot.
Yeah, our expectations and our experience are really linked. If you expect it to hurt, it's going to hurt. And people are much more likely to expect it to hurt when they have underlying depression, when they have underlying anxiety. So, it's a complicated mechanism. And we don't always know the mechanisms by which certain things work. I mean, there are emergency rooms around the country that will not use opioids, for example, but they will use ketamine. How exactly does ketamine help with pain? Probably in totally different ways than opioids work on pain. There are places that will use virtual reality. There are places that focus on treating mood disorders as part of the pain clinic. We are sort of a monotherapy culture. Let's try this one thing, should I take ibuprofen or should I take Tylenol? You go to ERs in Brooklyn and they'll say, do both. They work in totally different ways in the body. Why do you keep asking Tylenol versus ibuprofen? And when you find people who take both, they get sort of this exponential benefit to taking both those together as opposed to either of those alone. So, I think we're starting to change. But yes, treating depression, treating anxiety alongside the pain seems to make a much bigger difference.
And one of the other practical tips, stretching and movement. And that's another thing I'm going to keep bringing it back to personal, because this is what makes it relevant to people, because we all have these experiences. I remember when I hurt my back, I was moving less. And I was tightening up in and of itself. So everything kept. So talk to me about movement, stretching, and how important this is.
I find that we basically have thought about this in almost the exact opposite way of the way we should. If you look at something as simple as take a sprained ankle, for example. So if you sprain your ankle, it hurts. You're typically told
stay off of it. Yeah.
Stay off of it and do what is called the RICE protocol, which is rest it, ice it, compress it, elevate it. Now, all those things are designed to basically decrease blood flow to the ankle, decrease inflammation. reduce swelling, all that sort of stuff. There was a study that came out a couple of years ago that I think really called that into question. And the study was a pretty simple one. They were looking at trying to figure out who is more likely to develop chronic pain. Who is that demographic of people? And they came upon something that surprised them, and they found that people who had the lowest levels of inflammation at the time of injury were the most likely to have chronic pain. So low levels of inflammation, which we think is the goal.
Yeah. Interesting.
They were most likely to have chronic pain. So when you rest, ice, compress, elevate, you're actually decreasing inflammation and increasing the likelihood of having chronic pain. Completely backwards.
That's wild.
So instead, the acronym among many people in the sports medicine world, pain world, is MEAT, which is mobilization, exercise, analgesia if you need it, but not anti-inflammatories, and treatment, which can be massage, treatment, things like that. You want to mobilize as much as possible. And the goal, if it's a broken ankle, obviously you don't want to, be walking on it. But anything short of that, you want to be getting those inflammatory mediators to the site of injury. It'll help heal, and it will help decrease your chance of developing chronic pain. So many countries around the world, they're like, hey man, get up, be moving around as quickly as possible, mobilize as quickly as possible. The resting of the injured appendage, whatever it might be, that's typically not the right answer. And that's very different.
Counterintuitive
for decades.
You talk about nutrition also. Now, that I would say, wait a second, I'm in pain. You're telling me what I eat and how I eat is going to really affect it?
I hear your skepticism. I thought the same thing. My wife deals with autoimmune disease, and it's a significant part of our lives. She can be very debilitated by this, to the point where there are times when I come home from work, I have to carry her up the stairs. She cannot even navigate the stairs. It's tough. As part of that, she went on a very restrictive diet as part of her treatment for that, including, a diet that was very low in just about everything, including, things that would increase inflammation. And in a show of solidarity, Donna, you'd have been proud of me, I did this alongside her.
Good for you.
And it was, it wasn't the most exciting diet, but she did her good job to make it as tasty as possible. Yeah. And what I noticed as a guy in his mid 50s was that the general aches and pains of life just started to go away. It was weird. You hit your heel on a step that you missed, and that's going to hurt for the rest of the day, if not a couple of days. Get up in the morning and you just sort of, I felt good on this diet that I was on with her. Probably decreasing my overall levels of inflammation, probably influencing my microbiome, which is greatly associated with pain as well. Your intestines are sort of your second brain here. So if your microbiome is not up to speed, you're probably setting yourself up for more pain. I felt good mentally as well. So, I think there's lots of things that we can do in terms of our diet overall, which I got very granular about it in the book, because just saying go on an anti-inflammatory diet, I think is confusing for people. But to get really specific about the types of foods, not just what you eat, when you eat, what you're pairing those foods with as well. There are certain cultures around the world, like in Kerala, India, where they do the Ayurvedic diet, which is a highly functional diet. I mean, in most countries, diet is determined by palate, but in Kerala, for example, it's determined mostly by functionality of food. So they have these huge scribes on what to eat, when to eat, what type of body type you are. So we really dove into it for a couple of years, my wife and I, and saw firsthand the impact. The studies bear it out, but we lived it as well.
There's a lot of personal anecdotes in the book, including your own. When you're 12 years old, you got impaled on a fence. I just even saying that out loud. Talk to me about how that informed so much of you and so much of your work going forward.
It was the wildest experience, and not something that I reflected on too much at the time. And when you injure yourself like this, embarrassment sort of becomes the predominant emotion. I think I didn't really want to talk about it. I was trying to vault myself over this fence. It was it was a spike fence, and I didn't make it over. I was having a great day. It's probably, I was really, really confident in my ability to vault over this fence. And instead it impaled me, went through the right side of my my back and came right out through the front. And I was sort of pinned on this fence. And I was just high enough that I couldn't put my feet on the ground to sort of hoist myself off of it. So I was sort of stuck there,
Oy.
which was wild. But I remember thinking even at the time, like, this is awful. Obviously, I have a metal, thing, a spike fence going through my body. But after a couple of minutes of being there, I remember it didn't hurt as much. And to the point where a couple of times I would reach behind and say, am I still impaled? Yeah.
So what was that
Because
about?
your body will make its own opioids. It's called the endogenous opioid system. And it responds really robustly to a painful episode like that. So you're in the middle of this awfully painful thing, and then the opioids just overwhelm your body. And it's almost to the point of euphoria, where not only do you not feel pain, there's almost a euphoric mood that you start to have. I didn't feel like, I thought it was going to feel like a hot poker going through my back. And after a while, it just felt like someone was had slapped my back pretty hard. But that was it. Despite the fact that I had this metal thing still sticking in my body, it's a very, very important protective mechanism. Some people think the endogenous opioid system is essentially the placebo effect. Wow, that worked. But it's a lot of our expectations again informing our experience. When those opioids hit my body, it did all these amazing things for me in terms of reducing the pain, but also decreasing the traumatic memory of the event. So when you take opioids as a pill, it helps with pain. There's no question about it. And for some people, it's a lifesaver. But it also impacts your memory in terms of actually enhancing your memory of that event, which is something you don't want. And it depresses your mood as well. When you're making your own opioids, also helps with pain, but it decreases your memory of the event, and it improves your mood.
It's incredible.
So I wrote in the book, I said, were it not for the endogenous opioid system, no woman I know would probably ever have more than one baby. But when they have a baby and their endogenous opioid system kicks in, decreases pain, decreases the traumatic memory of the event, and improves their mood. And all of a sudden, delivering a baby becomes this joyful experience. I've never done it, obviously.
You and I have to take the easy way out. Hey, before I let you go, what is your if I said to you, okay, you're worried about this from a World Health point of view right now. This is the biggest challenge we're facing. What keeps you up at night?
Yeah, are you talking about pain specifically?
No, I'm not.
Or
Just in general now.
I would say that I'm still an optimistic guy, Donnie. And maybe this won't be a popular way of thinking about this, but I think with regard to our healthcare system, look, there's a lot of things that I worry about on a regular basis. I worry about another pandemic. I think there are flu viruses that are going around. There's highly pathogenic avian flu. I mean, even COVID, if you think about it, depending on the statistics you look at, maybe had around a 0.5% mortality rate. Flu's around a 0.1% mortality rate. SARS back in 2003 was, you're talking 10 to 30% mortality rates. If you get a highly transmissible virus that has a high mortality rate in the double digits, 10%, that would be 20 times as lethal as COVID was.
Jesus.
That's worrisome at a time when we are cutting way back on public health spending, and one time we're the world's leader in terms of combating these types of pandemics. So that I worry about that. I worry about all the absolutely preventable problems around childhood obesity and diabetes. We see that now in a younger population. That population is aging already. So as bad as heart disease, dementia, diabetes have been in our generation, we didn't have as much obesity and diabetes when we were kids. Think about all those people growing up. What's going to happen to our healthcare system overall? What's obviously going to happen to all of them in terms of being able to care for them? I worry about that. And I am worried about this politicalization of science. It's weird. I did a documentary on people who were either anti-vax or vaccine hesitant many years ago. And if you were to pick the demographic of people most likely to be vaccine reluctant or resistant back then, it would have been a young liberal woman.
Wow. Wow.
And nowadays, it is an older conservative man. So what does that tell you? Within 5 to 10 years, the entire demographic shifted with regard to vaccines. I think what it tells us is that we are sort of pawns in all of this. We are being told how to think about this, and most of it is wrong. It's a political sledgehammer, this vaccine issue, and people are using it for their own political purposes. So why did it go from completely opposite demographics within a few short years? It's because there are larger sort of influences at play. That happens. I mean, you know that world. Some of this is just it's marketing in a way. But I mean, unfortunately, there are a lot of lives at stake here, both in terms of illness and even death.
So true. Sanjay Gupta, what an absolute pleasure talking to you. A real privilege. I'm a big fan. The book doesn't have to hurt. I'm going to do my marketing expertise now. If you're one of the 51 million people, obviously that's a no-brainer. Get it tomorrow. If you're one of the other 250 million people, you're going to have pain, so get it the next day, all right? Because there's a lot of preventative stuff in there, and it's a news you can use. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Sanjay.
Donnie, thanks for having me. I feel like I could talk to you all
we
day long.
could have kept going.
What a pleasure.
You too. Stay well and stay healthy, okay? Everybody, thanks for watching. If you like it, hit that subscribe button. And we love having you here watching On Brand. And just don't miss any future episodes. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We'll see you next time.